The scanner's gentle hum filled the quiet observation deck as ambassador. Kryn studied the readings from the blue-green world below. 3 days of careful analysis had revealed nothing but contradictions. The planet's surface teemed with life, despite conditions that should have sterilized it eons ago. Massive storms regularly swept across continents with wind speeds that could shred most starships. The ground itself split and reformed as molten rock burst through the crust. Even the atmosphere seemed hostile, containing enough oxygen to fuel explosive fires and enough water vapor to drown most species. "Fascinating," muttered Communications Officer Nara as she adjusted the translation matrix for the 100th time. The signals from the planet's surface carried an odd quality that made her sensors struggle to process them. The inhabitants seemed to communicate through a combination of vocal patterns and subtle body language that suggested far more complexity than their primitive technology implied. Captain Veltar entered the observation deck with his usual measured stride. His pale blue skin reflected the starlight streaming through the viewport as he approached the central console. The Altani had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of peaceful contact with developing species. His record showed 47 successful integrations into the Galactic Alliance without a single incident of violence or cultural contamination. "Have we learned anything new about these humans?" he asked, pronouncing the alien word carefully. The translation software had taken 12 hours to decode their self-designation, and even now it carried undertones that seemed to shift depending on context. Nara pulled up a holographic display showing the planet's dominant species. The creatures appeared remarkably fragile, standing upright on 2 thin legs with no natural armor or obvious defensive capabilities. Their skin looked soft and easily damaged, and their limbs seemed designed more for manipulation than combat. Most puzzling of all, they showed no signs of the usual adaptations that Deathworld species develop for survival. "They're completely unsuited for their environment," Kryn observed with scientific detachment. "No enhanced bone density, no radiation resistance, no temperature regulation beyond basic metabolic functions. By all rights, they should have died out millennia ago." The scanner registered another massive earthquake near one of the human population centers. Veltar watched the readings with growing concern as the seismic activity would have leveled any Alliance city. But the humans seemed to have anticipated it. Their structures bent and swayed with the ground movement, and within hours, they were already beginning repairs to damaged areas. "They adapt," Nara said quietly. "Not biologically, but behaviorally. Watch how they respond to natural disasters." The communication array crackled to life as another transmission arrived from the planet's surface. The human representative identified himself as Director Walsh and spoke in measured tones that carried an undertone of careful evaluation. He acknowledged the Alliance's presence with neither fear nor aggression, but with a watchful curiosity that made Veltar slightly uncomfortable. "We welcome contact with other intelligent species," Walsh's voice carried through the ship's speakers. "We've been wondering when someone would find us out here." The casual tone struck Kryn as odd. Most species showed either worship or terror when first confronted with advanced galactic civilization. Humans seemed to treat it as an expected development, rather than a miraculous event. "They're remarkably calm for a species experiencing first contact," Veltar observed. "Either they're extremely adaptable or they've been expecting us." Nara frowned at her readings. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from their major population centers. Nothing that registers as weapons, but the patterns are unlike anything in our databases." The Alliance had protocols for this situation. Primitive species from hostile worlds often made excellent support personnel once properly integrated. Their adaptation to harsh conditions made them valuable for dangerous tasks that other species couldn't perform safely. The humans would likely prove useful for asteroid mining, waste disposal, or other hazardous but simple work. "Begin standard integration procedures," Veltar ordered. "Full diplomatic contact, cultural exchange, and preliminary evaluation for Alliance membership. They seem peaceful enough." Director Walsh's next transmission caught everyone by surprise. Instead of the usual questions about advanced technology or pleas for assistance, he asked detailed questions about alliance structure, member species capabilities, and resource distribution networks. His queries showed a sophisticated understanding of interstellar politics that seemed impossible for a species that had never left their home system. "How do they know to ask about our supply chains?" Kryn muttered. "Most species don't even understand the concept of multiple star systems." The human representative continued his careful questioning, probing for information about Alliance military capabilities, defensive strategies, and historical conflicts. Each question seemed innocuous individually, but together they painted a picture of systematic intelligence gathering that made Veltar increasingly uneasy. "Sir," Nara interrupted, "I'm receiving multiple signals from across their planet. They're not just communicating with us through Director Walsh, they're coordinating responses through some kind of global network." The implications sent a chill through the observation deck. Primitive species didn't typically have planet-wide communication systems, and they certainly didn't coordinate their responses to first contact. The humans were displaying organizational capabilities that suggested either remarkable natural cooperation or extensive experience with external threats. "Perhaps we should slow down the integration process," Veltar suggested. "Standard protocols recommend a full year of observation before formal contact." But Director Walsh's next message made that impossible. He formally requested Alliance membership on behalf of his species, demonstrating not only knowledge of the application process but also providing preliminary data packages that met most of the standard requirements. The humans had somehow prepared for this moment despite having no prior contact with galactic civilization, the Alliance. Council would be pleased with such an efficient first contact. A cooperative species from a harsh world would make excellent additions to their growing federation. But as Veltar watched the holographic display showing human settlements rebuilding after another natural disaster, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being missed. The humans weren't just survivors of a hostile world. They were something else entirely, and the Alliance was about to discover what that meant. The asteroid mining station hummed with activity as Engineer Tom finished his modifications to the extraction equipment. Around him, 3 different Alliance species worked at their assigned tasks, but their movements seemed sluggish compared to the humans' quick efficiency. The equipment now operated at speeds that should have been impossible according to manufacturer specifications. "This is highly irregular," muttered Supervisor Grix, his forearms gesturing nervously as he examined the modified machinery. "These changes violate 17 safety protocols and void the warranty on critical systems." Tom wiped his hands on a cloth and smiled with the easy confidence that seemed to characterize all humans. "It's safe enough. The efficiency gain is worth the risk, and the original safety margins were probably calculated for species that can't handle emergency repairs in hazardous environments." The casual dismissal of Alliance safety standards troubled Grix more than he wanted to admit. In the 3 months since human integration began, similar incidents had occurred across dozens of installations. Humans consistently pushed equipment beyond rated specifications, modified systems without authorization, and somehow made everything work better than before. Back on the command station, Commander Rex reviewed the latest reports with growing concern. The human integration program had proceeded faster than any in Alliance history, but the results were nothing like previous additions to their federation. Most species required years of careful guidance to adapt to galactic civilization. Humans seemed to be adapting the civilization to themselves instead. "They're asking too many questions," Cultural Liaison Pia reported during the daily briefing. "Not just about technology or procedures, but about our history, our conflicts, our weaknesses." Medical Officer Kim wanted to know why the Zerathi delegation carries combat enhancers if they're truly a peaceful species. Rex felt his secondary heart skip a beat. The Zerathi had been integrated into the Alliance 50 years ago as a scientific species specializing in agricultural development. Their combat history was classified information that even most Alliance personnel didn't know. How had a human medical officer identified signs of military enhancement in a routine health screening? "What did you tell her?" Rex asked. "Nothing." I redirected her attention to standard medical protocols. But she didn't seem convinced. She has this way of looking at you that makes you feel like she's recording everything for later analysis. The communication panel chimed with an incoming message from Director Walsh. The human representative requested a private meeting with Alliance leadership to discuss concerns about transparency in the integration process. The formal language couldn't hide the underlying implication that humans had discovered something they weren't supposed to know. Rex authorized the meeting while privately activating additional security protocols. The Alliance had dealt with suspicious species before, but humans presented unique challenges. Their Deathworld origin should have made them grateful for any opportunity to escape their hostile environment. Instead, they seemed to be evaluating the Alliance as much as the Alliance was evaluating them. The meeting took place in a secure chamber aboard the primary command vessel. Director Walsh arrived with two other humans who introduced themselves. Simply as advisors, they moved with the fluid awareness that Rex recognized as combat training, despite their supposed civilian status. "We appreciate the opportunities you've provided our people," Walsh began, "but we've noticed some inconsistencies in the information you've shared about Alliance structure and capabilities." The directness of the approach caught Rex off guard. Most species took months to build up courage for such confrontational discussions. Walsh seemed to expect immediate answers to uncomfortable questions. "What specifically concerns you?" Rex asked, hoping to gauge how much the humans had actually discovered. "Your species descriptions don't match the evidence we've observed," one of the advisors replied. "The Zerathi show clear signs of military conditioning. The Altani have weapon calluses despite claiming to be diplomats. The mining equipment we've been assigned to operate shows modifications for rapid conversion to military applications." Rex felt his blood temperature drop. These observations required not just casual attention, but systematic analysis of classified military information. The humans hadn't just been working their assigned jobs. They'd been conducting comprehensive intelligence, gathering operations across multiple Alliance installations. "Furthermore," Walsh continued, "we've noticed that species integration follows a consistent pattern. Initial cooperation, gradual dependency, eventual absorption into Alliance command structure with loss of autonomous decision-making. We're curious about how this process is supposed to benefit the integrated species." The room fell silent as Rex processed the implications. The humans hadn't just discovered Alliance military capabilities. They'd identified the underlying strategy that the Alliance had used to expand across the galaxy for centuries. The peaceful integration program was actually a sophisticated method of conquest that avoided direct military confrontation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Rex said carefully. "The Alliance operates for mutual benefit of all member species." "Does it?" Walsh asked. "Because from our analysis, the Alliance appears to be a collection of conquered species operating under the control of a core group of predator races who've learned that manipulation is more efficient than direct warfare." The accuracy of the assessment struck Rex like a physical blow. These supposedly primitive humans had seen through centuries of carefully constructed deception in a matter of months. They'd somehow recognized the Alliance's true nature while simultaneously appearing to cooperate with the integration process. "What do you want?" Rex asked, abandoning any pretense of diplomatic protocol. "Honest communication," Walsh replied. "We understand the nature of interstellar politics. We're not naive about the realities of survival in a hostile galaxy. But we prefer to work with partners who acknowledge what they are rather than pretending to be something else." The human response made no sense according to Alliance psychological profiles. Species that discovered the truth about Alliance integration typically either fled or attempted desperate resistance. Humans seemed to be offering continued cooperation despite knowing they were being manipulated. "You're not what we expected," Rex admitted. "Neither are you," Walsh smiled. "But that doesn't mean we can't find common ground. Just don't assume we're too primitive to understand what's really happening." As the meeting concluded, Rex realized that the Alliance had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They'd assumed that Deathworld origin meant desperation and gratitude for any assistance. Instead, it seemed to have produced a species that understood predatory behavior well enough to recognize it in others and respond accordingly. The question now was whether the Alliance was prepared to deal with partners who couldn't be manipulated or deceived. The emergency alarm's harsh wail cut through the peaceful atmosphere of the Alliance Command Center like a blade through silk. Emergency Coordinator Jex rushed to the central display where red warning indicators flashed across multiple star systems. The readings showed massive fleet movements in the Outer Rim territories, but the sensor signatures matched nothing in current Alliance databases. "Impossible," whispered Intelligence Officer Yara as she cross-referenced the data. "These energy patterns match historical records from the Ravager Wars, but that fleet was destroyed 3 centuries ago." The first battle reports arrived within hours, and they painted a terrifying picture. The Ravager fleet had returned with ships that seemed immune to standard Alliance weapons. Their technology had evolved during their absence, incorporating advances that made them nearly unstoppable against traditional defensive strategies. Captain Veltar stood before the Alliance Council as they received reports of colony after colony falling to the advancing fleet. The careful diplomatic solutions that had maintained peace for generations proved useless against an enemy that showed no interest in negotiation or surrender. "Our outer defenses are failing," admitted Defense Coordinator Thane. "The Ravagers have learned from our previous encounters. They're targeting our command structures and supply lines with surgical precision." The revelation that followed struck the Council like a physical blow. The peaceful alliance that had spent centuries promoting diplomatic solutions was actually a confederation of former warrior species who had chosen manipulation over direct conflict. Their integration program had been designed to identify and neutralize potential threats before they could develop into serious challenges. "We've grown soft," Thane continued. "Generations of depending on deception and political maneuvering have left us unprepared for actual warfare. Our military capabilities exist on paper, but our personnel have no real combat experience." Director Walsh entered the council chamber at that moment, flanked by 2 other humans who moved with the fluid awareness of trained soldiers. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental, suggesting that humans had been monitoring Alliance communications far more closely than anyone had realized. "We've been following the situation," Walsh said without preamble. "The Ravager fleet represents a significant threat to galactic stability. We'd like to offer assistance." The casual tone struck the Council as inappropriate given the circumstances. Most species would have been demanding immediate evacuation or protection. The humans seemed to be treating the crisis as an opportunity rather than a disaster. "With respect," Veltar replied, "your species has been part of the Alliance for less than 6 months. You lack the technology or experience to contribute meaningfully to our defense." "Do we?" Walsh asked. "Because from our analysis, you lack the practical experience to defend against a determined military assault. Your ships are designed for intimidation rather than combat. Your personnel are trained for administration rather than warfare. Your strategic thinking has been shaped by centuries of avoiding direct confrontation." The accuracy of the assessment created uncomfortable silence in the council chamber. The Alliance had indeed allowed their military capabilities to atrophy while focusing on political manipulation and economic control. The Ravager fleet had chosen the perfect moment to return, catching them at their most vulnerable. "What are you proposing?" asked Council Leader Mirren. "Joint operations," Walsh replied. "We provide military expertise and personnel. You provide ships and logistical support. Together we stop the Ravagers before they can establish permanent control over Alliance territory." The proposal seemed absurd. Humans had no space-based military experience and no knowledge of advanced weapon systems. But as the reports continued to arrive showing Alliance forces being systematically destroyed, the Council found themselves considering impossible options. "You're asking us to trust a species we've known for less than a year," Mirren observed. "You're asking us to trust a species that's been lying to us since first contact," Walsh countered. "We're still here," still willing to work together. Because we understand that survival sometimes requires cooperation with people you don't entirely trust. The human response revealed something that made the entire council uncomfortable. These supposedly primitive beings had known about alliance deception from the beginning, but had chosen to maintain the pretense of cooperation. They'd been evaluating the alliance just as thoroughly as the alliance had been evaluating them. "You knew," Veltar said quietly. "You knew what we were from the start." "We recognized the pattern," Walsh admitted. "Successful predator species that learn to use manipulation instead of direct violence. It's an effective strategy for expansion and resource acquisition. We weren't offended by it." The casual acceptance of alliance deception struck the council as even more unsettling than outright hostility would have been. Humans seemed to understand predatory behavior so well that they could work with it without being manipulated by it. "Why?" "Help us?" Mirren asked. "Because the alternative is worse," Walsh replied. "The Ravagers represent chaos and destruction without any constructive purpose. At least the Alliance maintains some form of civilization and order. We'd rather work with organized predators than disorganized destroyers." The first joint operation took place 3 days later when human advisors boarded Alliance vessels to coordinate defense of a critical supply depot. The results shocked everyone involved. Human tactical recommendations turned a predicted defeat into a decisive victory, using strategies that seemed to anticipate Ravager responses with uncanny accuracy. "How did you know they would concentrate their forces at the supply depot?" Veltar asked after the battle. "Because that's what we would have done," replied human military advisor Grant. "The Ravagers are using textbook Deathworld tactics. They prioritize resource denial over territory acquisition. Once you understand their strategic thinking, their actions become predictable." The implications struck the Alliance leadership like a thunderbolt. Humans weren't just offering to help fight the Ravagers. They were offering to fight them using the same type of strategic thinking that had made them successful. The Alliance was about to discover what happened when one Deathworld species confronted another in open warfare. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was considered one of the most dangerous planets in known space. The retrofitted Alliance cruiser shuddered as human-designed weapon systems came online for the first time. Lieutenant Cooper stood beside the main tactical display, watching Alliance crew members struggle to adapt to the new combat protocols. The modifications looked crude compared to the elegant Alliance technology, but they produced results that spoke louder than aesthetics. "The targeting system is completely different," complained Alliance Weapons Officer Drix. "These human modifications ignore half our safety protocols and push our power systems beyond rated capacity." "Safety protocols don't matter if you're dead," Cooper replied matter-of-factly. "Alliance weapons are designed to disable and intimidate. These modifications are designed to destroy threats permanently." The philosophical difference became clear as the joint fleet approached the first major engagement with Ravager forces. Alliance doctrine emphasized containment and negotiation even during combat operations. Human doctrine focused on eliminating enemy capabilities so thoroughly that surrender became the only viable option. "They're going to ram us," observed Alliance Navigator Pex as the Ravager formation adjusted course. "Standard defensive posture calls for evasive maneuvers and long-range engagement." "Standard defensive posture gets you killed," Cooper said. Calmly, "All ships implement Cooper Pattern 7. We're going to let them think they're winning." The human tactical approach bewildered the Alliance crews. Instead of avoiding the enemy charge, they positioned themselves to absorb maximum damage while concentrating fire on specific targets. The strategy seemed suicidal until the results became apparent. "Their lead ship is breaking apart," reported Sensors Officer Quinn with amazement. "We've destroyed their command vessel and disabled their communications array. The rest of their fleet is falling back in disorder." The victory came at a cost that would have been unacceptable to most Alliance species. 3 Alliance vessels suffered critical damage, and casualty reports showed numbers that should have forced immediate withdrawal. But the human crew members continued working despite injuries that would have incapacitated any other species. Medical emergency on Deck 7, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Human personnel are refusing treatment and insisting on remaining at their posts. Alliance Medical Officer Trin rushed to the damaged section where she found human crew members, operating critical systems with injuries that should have rendered them unconscious. One engineer was manually regulating power flow while blood from a head wound obscured half his vision. "You need immediate medical attention," Trin insisted. "I need to keep this ship functional," the engineer replied without looking away from his work. "Medical attention can wait until we're not in immediate danger of dying." The human approach to combat medicine reflected their general philosophy about survival. Alliance species treated injury as a reason to withdraw from danger. Humans seemed to treat injury as motivation to eliminate the source of danger more quickly. "They're not normal," whispered Alliance Communications Officer Zara as she watched human boarding parties prepare for direct assault on a damaged Ravager vessel. "They're planning to fight hand-to-hand combat in a depressurized environment against species that are physically larger and stronger than they are." The boarding action that followed became legendary among Alliance forces. Human soldiers didn't just capture the Ravager command ship. They systematically disabled every system, captured all surviving crew members, and secured complete intelligence files on Ravager fleet composition and strategy. "How did they do it?" demanded Alliance Fleet Commander Roth when the boarding party returned. "The Ravagers are natural predators with enhanced physical capabilities. They should have torn apart any boarding party. They fought like they were already dead," reported one of the human soldiers. "When you're not afraid of dying, you can take risks that living creatures can't afford." The explanation made no sense to Alliance personnel until they observed more. Human combat operations. These Deathworld survivors didn't just accept the possibility of death during combat. They incorporated it into their strategic planning, using tactics that depended on their willingness to sacrifice individual survival. FOR mission success. "It's psychological warfare," observed Alliance Analyst Port. "They're not just fighting to win. They're fighting to prove that death doesn't scare them. It terrifies their enemies and inspires their allies." The turning point came during the Battle of Kepler Station when a combined human Alliance fleet faced the main Ravager force. The enemy outnumbered them 3-1 and possessed superior technology. But human tactical coordination turned the engagement into a masterpiece of military efficiency. "All Alliance vessels maintain defensive formation," ordered Admiral Grant over the fleet communication channel. "Human assault teams will board disabled enemy vessels and secure their command structures. Do not attempt to rescue human personnel who become isolated during boarding operations." The order violated every principle of Alliance military doctrine, but the results spoke for themselves. Human boarding parties captured or destroyed 12 Ravager vessels while suffering casualties that would have broken any other species. They didn't just win battles. They won them so decisively that enemy survivors spread word of human combat capabilities throughout the Ravager fleet. "They're withdrawing," reported Alliance Tactical Officer Wren with disbelief. "The entire Ravager fleet is pulling back to defensive positions." The strategic implications struck the Alliance leadership like a thunderbolt. For the first time in the conflict, Ravager forces were avoiding direct engagement. The psychological impact of human combat effectiveness had accomplished what superior technology and numerical advantage couldn't achieve. "They're afraid," realized Commander Rex during the post-battle analysis. "The Ravagers are actually afraid of humans." The revelation transformed Alliance understanding of their human partners. These supposedly primitive beings from a backwater. Deathworld had proven more effective against a superior enemy than the combined military might of the Galactic Alliance. They'd done it not through advanced technology or superior numbers, but through sheer determination and tactical thinking that turned every disadvantage into an advantage. "What happens now?" asked Captain Veltar as the joint fleet regrouped for the next phase of operations. "Now we finish what they started," replied Admiral Grant. The Ravagers made the mistake of thinking that superior technology and physical capabilities guarantee victory. We're going to teach them what happens when you underestimate species that learn to survive on Deathworlds. The Alliance was about to discover that their greatest asset wasn't advanced technology or diplomatic sophistication. It was an alliance with beings who understood that survival sometimes required embracing the very dangers that other species spent their lives avoiding. The War Crimes Tribunal convened in the aftermath of the Ravager defeat, but the proceedings took an unexpected turn when human representatives presented comprehensive documentation of alliance deception spanning centuries. Director Walsh stood before the assembled delegates with data files that detailed every manipulation, every false promise, and every species that had been absorbed through the integration program. "We've been recording everything since first contact," Walsh explained to the stunned gathering. "Not because we intended to use it against you, but because we wanted to understand how your system actually worked." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Humans had documented alliance behavior with scientific precision, creating a complete record of how the supposedly peaceful Federation had conquered dozens of civilizations through systematic deception and manipulation. "Why?" asked Council Leader Mirren. "Why didn't you expose us earlier? Why fight alongside us despite knowing the truth?" "Because we recognized what you were," Walsh replied. "Successful predator species that learned to use intelligence instead of brute force. It's an effective survival strategy, and we respect effectiveness." The human response baffled the entire Alliance leadership. Most species that discovered the truth about Alliance integration either fled in terror or attempted desperate resistance. Humans seem to have evaluated the system, understood its purposes, and chosen to work within it rather than against it. "You're not afraid of us," observed Captain Veltar. "Should we be?" Walsh asked. "You're predators who learn to use manipulation instead of violence. We're predators who learn to use cooperation instead of competition. Neither approach is inherently evil. They're just different solutions to the same survival problem." The casual analysis of alliance behavior as a survival strategy rather than moral failing created an uncomfortable moment of self-reflection among the delegates. Humans seem to understand predatory behavior so well because they recognized it in themselves. "What do you want from us?" asked Defense Coordinator Thane. "Honest partnership," Walsh replied. "We're not interested in conquest or domination. We just want to work with people who acknowledge what they are instead of pretending to be something else." The proposal created chaos in the Alliance Council chambers. Honest partnership implied equal status and mutual respect, concepts that were foreign to a system built on manipulation and control. But the recent war had demonstrated that human cooperation was worth more than any conquered species could provide. "The integration program would have to be completely restructured," protested Integration Coordinator Bex. "We'd have to abandon centuries of proven methods." "Your proven methods created the conditions that allowed the Ravagers to nearly destroy you," Walsh pointed out. "Maybe it's time to try something different." The human perspective forced the Alliance to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their system of expansion through deception had been successful for centuries, but it had also made them vulnerable to external threats. They'd grown so dependent on manipulation that they'd forgotten how to fight when manipulation failed. "You saved us," admitted Commander Rex. "Without human intervention, the Ravagers would have destroyed the Alliance completely." "We helped you save yourselves," Walsh corrected. "The Alliance has resources and capabilities that we need. We have experience and perspectives that you need. Together we're stronger than either of us would be alone." The formal negotiations that followed lasted for months, but the outcome transformed the Alliance in ways that no one had anticipated. The integration program was replaced with genuine partnership agreements that recognized the sovereignty and capabilities of member species. The deception-based expansion strategy gave way to honest cooperation and mutual benefit arrangements. "It's working better than anyone expected," reported Alliance Administrator F. Ellen during the first annual review of the new system. "Species that were previously resistant to integration are requesting partnership agreements. They trust us now because they know what they're getting into." The irony wasn't lost on Alliance leadership. By abandoning deception and embracing honesty, they'd become more attractive to potential allies than they'd ever been through manipulation. The psychological effect of the human example had convinced other species that the Alliance could be trusted as partners rather than feared as conquerors. Captain Veltar found himself serving as humanity's primary advocate on the Alliance Council, a role that would have seemed impossible during first contact. The transformation had been gradual, but profound, changing not just Alliance policies but Alliance thinking about the nature of interstellar cooperation. "They're teaching us things we never knew we needed to learn," Veltar reported during a council session. Human approaches to problem-solving, resource management, and conflict resolution are completely different from anything in our databases. The human influence extended beyond military applications. Their Deathworld experience had taught them to find solutions using limited resources, to adapt quickly to changing conditions, and to cooperate effectively under extreme stress. These skills proved invaluable for managing the complex challenges of governing a diverse galactic federation. "The efficiency improvements are remarkable," noted Resource Coordinator Yex. "Human optimization techniques have increased productivity across 17 different industrial sectors. They seem to instinctively understand how to eliminate waste and maximize output." But the most significant change was philosophical rather than practical. The Alliance had spent centuries viewing other species as either threats to be neutralized or resources to be exploited. Humans demonstrated that cooperation could produce better results than manipulation, and that trust was more valuable than control. "We were thinking too small," realized Council Leader Mirren during one of the regular strategy sessions. "We focused on managing individual species instead of building something larger than any of us could achieve alone." The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some Alliance species struggled to adapt to the new system of honest cooperation, and several attempted to resume the old patterns of deception and manipulation. But human advisors proved remarkably effective at identifying and addressing these problems before they could destabilize the partnership. "They see through everything," complained former integration specialist Hex. "It's impossible to maintain any kind of deception when humans are monitoring the situation. They recognize manipulation techniques that we thought were subtle and sophisticated." The human ability to detect and counter deception had an unexpected side effect. Other Alliance species began adopting human analytical techniques, creating a cascade effect that made dishonest behavior increasingly difficult to maintain throughout the Federation. "The entire culture is changing," observed Alliance sociologist Dren. "Species that have been manipulating each other for generations are learning to communicate directly and honestly. It's unprecedented in galactic history." Director Walsh stood before the Alliance Council for the final time as Earth's representative, preparing to hand over his duties to the newly established Human Alliance Joint Commission. The integration process was complete, but it had transformed both species in ways that no one had predicted. "The Alliance's mistake wasn't trusting a species from a Deathworld," Walsh said during his farewell address. "The mistake was assuming that Deathworld origin made us desperate enough to accept deception and manipulation as normal parts of civilization." The statement struck at the heart of what the Alliance had learned about humanity. These beings from one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds hadn't been grateful for rescue from their harsh environment. They'd been evaluating whether galactic civilization offered anything better than what they'd already built for themselves. "You could have left," Captain Veltar pointed out. "When you discovered our true nature, you could have withdrawn from the Alliance and developed your own interstellar capabilities." "We could have," Walsh agreed. "But isolation isn't strength. The galaxy is full of threats like the Ravagers, and facing them alone would have been foolish. We chose partnership because we recognize that working together produces better results than working alone." The human decision to maintain their Alliance partnership, despite discovering the deception, had created something unprecedented in galactic history, a federation based on mutual respect and honest cooperation rather than manipulation and control. The results spoke for themselves in terms of efficiency, stability, and member satisfaction. As the ceremony concluded, representatives from dozens of species approached the Human Alliance Joint Commission with requests for partnership agreements. The example of successful cooperation had convinced even traditionally isolationist species that the benefits of alliance outweighed the risks. "They're all asking the same question," noted new Human Representative Davis. "They want to know if we can guarantee that the alliance will continue to operate honestly and transparently." The answer had become the foundation of the new alliance charter. Honesty wasn't just a policy preference. It was a survival strategy that produced better results than any form of deception or manipulation. The galaxy's most successful predators had learned that their greatest strength lay not in their ability to deceive others, but in their capacity to earn genuine trust and cooperation. The Alliance's mistake had indeed been trusting a species from a Deathworld. But the mistake hadn't been the trust itself. It had been underestimating what that trust could accomplish when it was given freely and returned honestly.